Hello everybody, this is Marty from Dawg's blog with a noontime report of the morning session of the Frank Carson et al. Trial. This January 24th, 2019. The court was scheduled to start at 9:30. Judge got here about 9:35. Jury was up around 9:55. Judge on the bench at 9:57, so we got about a little over 20 minutes late. Almost 30 minutes late, actually. And just for information, too, this is court week 36, court day 127 of this trial. Robert Woody is on the stand again. Percy Martinez doing cross still of Robert Woody. He asked him about, Percy Martinez asked Robert Woody about his teeth being badly infected when he came back from Washington, and he had dental work done that was paid for by the Outlaws. Robert Woody received the bills, but Ed gave them to Bobby and Dee to pay for it. The down payment on the work was $400 deposit, and the final bill came to around $10,000. All bills received by the dentist to Robert Woody was given to the Outlaws to pay for it. He was asked about his drug of choice. He says alcohol, crystal meth, and marijuana. He said Percy asked if he was using meth since about 17, and he said it was around maybe when he was 17 years old. So that puts it around 26, 27, 28 years, somewhere around that time period. On August 3rd, 2016 is when he signed his plea agreement. He said he told his mom he had an offer for 10 years, and he was hoping to get 10 years is what he said he told his mom. He didn't recall the phone call, but he said that's what he was hoping he would get. But prior to October 3rd, 2016, he wasn't sure what he would get or what the offer would be even. And as a reminder, his plea agreement, his testimonial agreement, he got 7 years, 4 months total on a case that he was originally looking at 25 to life. Percy Martinez asked him if he ever spoke with Frank Carson again after his case was dismissed, and that was believed in May 10th of 2012. That was a 496 charge, which is a possession of stolen property charge when he was in a stolen car that was stolen by his brother. So he had never he did have the office visit after that court date, and he never spoke with Frank Carson after that case was dismissed. When he was asked when he was on the Frank Carson property in the altercation with Corey Kaufman, did he see anybody on the roof? He said he did not recall. He again refreshed with transcript and said no one was on the roof, is what he originally testified to in the prelim. And he never said he never saw any pipes on Frank Carson's property, nor saw anything stacked up that could be considered pipes. Again, that he was refreshed with a prelim transcript, that he said he didn't recall what he said in the prelim. And he said in the prelim, he said there was no pipes. And that was the first time that he had heard that, was what he said in the prelim, that there was pipes stacked up on the property. Percy Martinez also asked him what he testified to when he was burying Corey Kaufman and what he did with his shoes and socks. Again, he did not recall what he did with the shoes. Refreshing transcript. Again, from the preliminary hearing, he said he put the shoes back on. He said, correct, that's right. And he said that the socks also were put back on prior to putting the shoes on. That's correct, is what he said. So he was asked if he has said, he was asked if he had lied for several reasons to a law enforcement officer, and he said that he was willing to lie to keep himself out of trouble. And he said, well, I don't really recall that. Refreshing again from the transcript from the prelim, he said he would lie to the police to keep out of trouble and to protect his brother. And he also did that, by the way, to protect his mom. The last conversation that he had with Frank Carson was with Baljeet Atwal at Frank Carson's office they did discuss the thefts, and they had gone to Michael Cooley's house. That's the first time that Robert Woody said Frank Carson had said anything about the thefts on his property. Frank Carson, he said, and he was very clear about this. He didn't need to refresh or anything. He said, Frank Carson said, don't do anything, don't touch or beat up anyone, just get an address so I can give to the cops and they can investigate. Also, he was asked if he had told Corey Brown that no one was watching Frank Carson's property. During the preliminary hearing, again, he did not recall. They refreshed with a preliminary transcript. And he says correct. That's what he told Corey Brown. That's what he said in the prelim. So Percy Martinez asked him again. So the plan was simply just to get some information, some addresses to turn over to law enforcement. He said that's correct. At one point, Percy Martinez asked that he had tried to shift the blame to Scott McFarland, to law enforcement, and trying to blame Scott McFarland for the disappearance of Corey Kaufman, trying to blame it on Scott McFarland, and telling law enforcement that, and he was asked that was a lie, and he said, well, yeah, that's true, it was a lie. He was asked when he was in custody. Steve Jacobson gave some transcripts that were about 6 inches thick. And he actually had a ruler up there, and he measured it out, and he looked at it, and he said, yeah, it was about that thick, maybe 6 inches. Percy Martinez also asked him, did other people read any transcripts to him? He did not recall. Any police reports that were read to him, he did not recall. He didn't do any refresh on that, and I really don't know why Percy didn't refresh on those like he was everything else. On 5/10 of 2012, his case was dismissed, and he went to Frank Carson's office. He wasn't sure about the dates. He can't remember anything, especially when it comes to dates. And Percy showed him evidence number 736, which was the minute order from his court date on May 10th, 2012, saying that the case had been dismissed, and also said that he was not present during that hearing, and he said he thought he was, but it says that he was not present. He was asked if he went to Mike Cooley's house on 5/23/2012, which wouldn't have been the same date as what he kept saying that he went after the Frank Carson office visit, which was on 5/10 of 2012, the same day as his court date. And now he's saying he doesn't recall where he went after he was dismissed. The case was dismissed in court. And again, he said, well, the minute order says that you were not present in court, that Frank Carson appeared for him. He did act very surprised when he saw that minute order and said he was not present. So Percy Martinez inquired if the office visit was on the 10th actually, or on another day later in the month. And he also asked him that the Corey Kaufman event had already taken place if he went there on the 10th or later of May. Corey Kaufman event, for anybody that may not be familiar, the Corey Kaufman, their theory date is March 30th, 2012. March 30th, or early morning hours of March 31st, 2012. And he says that's correct. The event had already taken place when he went to Frank Carson's office. Frank Carson never mentioned Corey Kaufman before or after that date, and he never mentioned it to Frank Carson either. Robert Woody said he had told Frank Carson that he knew all the thieves in Turlock and where they sell and share and store stuff, and that he might be able to help him out. He did not recall Frank Carson asking about any stolen property, or specifically some stolen books. Frank Carson never asked them to hurt anyone. He was very clear about this, always has been. He says correct. And Frank Carson never asked him to kill or break the law. He just wanted the information to turn over to law enforcement. It was only after his case had been dismissed that he had heard about the thefts on the property. On July 22 of 2016 interview with Marlissa and Steve Jacobson, he said he was asked if he actually knew he was going to lie in going into that interview. He says yes. And he was going to lie about Frank Carson and Walter Wells being on the property, and Frank Carson was the one that took the gun, either gave the gun to or took the gun from Dawg Atwell. So on July 22nd, 2016, he had interviewed with Marlissa Ferrer and Steve Jacobson, and said Frank Carson and Walter Wells were on the property. And he had said, and later, a few days later, with his attorney, he admitted that he had lied about the entire, or Walter Wells and Frank Carson being there, and Frank Carson taking the gun and disposing of the gun. Apparently his lawyer had confronted him or talked to him about the lies he said in that interview 3 days earlier, and Robert Woody admitted lying about the Corey Kaufman incident, and also that no one there had any type of lighting apparatus. There was no flashlight, there's no lights on that area of the property. He's asked if he saw Baljeet Atwell had anything in his hand, like a flashlight. He didn't recall. Prelim testimony to refresh. He said during the prelim, he said he could see Baljeet Atwell's hands. There was nothing in them. The body was then taken to Poppincork. The back lot was lit at night. He did not recall if there was lights or not. They did do a refresh with a preliminary transcript again, that there was a light post in the front and the back, and the back of the vehicle was backed up to where he was working on the hole, and the vehicle was illuminated somewhat with that backlight that faces the alley that also goes into the lot. He was asked about if there's an apartment building across the alley, directly across from the light, that's a 2-story building that has windows that face the lot across the alley. And he says there are upper windows there that are about 20 feet away across the alley to the lot. The body was laying in the back of the truck facing those windows. There was some illumination from the light. He could not recall how long he'd been sitting there, but he refreshed with a transcript again from the preliminary hearing, and he said the body was in the truck about 10 minutes. To put the body on the tarp, after they'd laid the tarp out on the ground, there was a little bit of light from that light in the back that we had talked about. That was the only light, and there was no flashlights used. And that's the light that he had to use when he cut the fingers and the toes off the remains. He did not recall some of that, and he did have to refresh with the preliminary hearing transcript again, where he said the area of the apartments, the light shines in the alley, not on the property, but there is some illumination onto the lot from that light. Percy Martinez, it says there was he wanted to impeach with transcript. Judge asked him to approach. There was a brief sidebar, and Percy Martinez read the prelim into the transcript into the record, asking there was a question, light shine into the back of the property. He says correct. So there was light in the back of illuminating the back of the truck, and on the tarp where he had laid the body. In the preliminary hearing is what Percy read into the record. It was about 11 o'clock, right at 11 o'clock. We took a break. We come back at 11:25. Jury's back in at 11:25. Percy Martinez is continuing with Robert Woody. Percy was asking about he continued to work at Pop and Cork for 2 years after the Kaufman incident. And the Atwells had also paid for his teeth after the Kaufman alleged incident. And he worked there until he was fired by Baljeet Atwell. He says correct. He said he was fired for stealing an 18-pack of Pepsi. He used to deliver sodas and supplies and stuff to the other store. But he was caught apparently stealing some sodas. He was asked if Steve Jacobson did any favors for him, like fast foods during the transportations. He said he did receive some food from Taco Bell, McDonald's, Jack in the Box type of stuff, fast food that they could go through a drive-thru apparently or something. He was asked if he was allowed to smoke in jail. He says no, they're all non-smoking facilities now, but Steve Jacobson had given him cigarettes to smoke during the transportations. And he said that he was allowed to do that maybe 3 times during those transportations in 2014. He was asked about his preliminary hearing testimony, where Steve Jacobson did not allow him to smoke, refreshing the text because he doesn't remember that. He says it does refresh him. He did say in the preliminary hearing Steve Jacobson did not allow him to smoke, but now he's saying that was a lie also. He did allow him to smoke. Also, he was asked where the cigarettes came from. He said that, refreshing from the transcript again, because he didn't recall, the cigarettes were given to Steve Jacobson to give to Woody for him to smoke, and he is also given cigarettes at the district attorney's office to smoke. He said they went outside and smoked. He was constantly giving cigarettes over at the DA's office during interviews and such. He was asked if he was allowed contact visits with his family members. They had to have visits through a glass window, but they did have several contact visits at the DA's office. He says correct. He was allowed to kiss his mom at the DA's office. He said that's correct. So he was also talking about the night of the burial and cutting fingers off. He was asked if there was blood on your clothes. He didn't recall. He said if he had blood on his clothes. He was asked if there was blood on Corey Kaufman's clothes, especially the pants. He did not recall. They're again refreshing the transcript from the prelim. He said there was no blood on his clothes, but there was blood on Corey Kaufman's pants. And he took the shoes and socks off to remove the toes from the feet and replaced both the shoes and socks back on the feet, and they both got all bloody. Again, they referred to the Corey Kaufman alleged incident on the Carson property. It did happen at the end of March, but he went to Frank Carson's office, talking again after the court date apparently, and he never discussed anything to Frank Carson about what had occurred on the property. He was asked when he was in custody at Tuolumne County Jail, and he was cellmates with Patrick Hampton, who was also a witness in this case. He was not sure how long they had celled together. Patrick Hampton, what he had asked if Patrick Hampton was bigger than him. He did not recall if he was bigger than him or not. Patrick Hampton probably had, at one point, last time I saw Patrick Hampton, he had gained about 60 pounds, and he was much larger than Woody. He did not recall if he was afraid of Patrick Hampton. He says Patrick Hampton also accused Woody of admitting to the homicide. And Hampton tried to tell Jacobson. Jacobson wasn't interested in hearing it. But he says he did not tell Hampton that he had killed Corey Kaufman. Going back to that July 22nd, 2016 interview, he knew the information given was false. Talking about Frank Carson taking a gun from Dawg Atwell, and also talked about Walter Wells being there. Neither one of them had happened. Neither one of those two things had happened. But also indicated that Dee had given the gun to Frank Carson. He said that he eventually admitted that was a false statement to Marlissa Ferrer and Steve Jacobson. He never saw anyone handed a gun. Never saw the gun in Dawg Atwell's hand. Again, he had a refresh from the transcript of the preliminary hearing. Again, that's where he admitted that he never saw a gun in Dawg Atwell's hand. Percy Martinez kind of did a timeline here where he said on March 1st of 2014, if that's when he was first taken into custody, if he was asked if he saw a gun, he said no. On 8/14 of 2015, when the other defendants were taken into custody, and he was talking to Dombey and Jacobson, he was asked if he ever saw a gun. He said no. 8/15 of 2015, the next day, when he did a walkthrough of all the alleged crime scenes, he was asked by Marlissa Ferrer if he ever saw a gun. He said no. On July 22nd, 2016, was the first time that he ever mentioned anybody having a gun. Marlissa Ferrer was starting to bounce in her seat a little bit, and she put up a major objection, and said she said something to the effect that extremely misstates the evidence or something like that, and that lit up the room a little bit. And Judge Zuniga first read the transcript and see if that's what he said. She says objections overruled. She also struck the comments made by Marlissa Ferrer as inappropriate comments in front of the jury. So he was asked that prior to 7/22 of 2016, he was never told anyone about the gun. It was only after Mom's visit to the jail, where she held a note up to the window and told him that if you want to get out of jail, this is what you need to say. Also, that was after Beverly Woody had taken the stand in the preliminary hearing and had given a false story, which everybody has admitted it was a false story, and testified in the preliminary hearing that Woody had told her all about the story, that what had happened that night. It was not the truth. Everything that she said was not true. None of it happened. They all have admitted it didn't happen. Judge has had stricken all of Beverly Woody's testimony too in the prelim. So that's where we broke for lunch. We'll be back at 1:30. Don't forget the podcast tonight.